At 82, Bill Gaither said something that nobody in the gospel community expected him to say out loud, and the name he mentioned, the one singer he admitted losing too soon, the voice he believes the world never fully heard, is one that stopped people cold when they heard it. Bill Gaither has said a lot of things over a long ministry. Quiet things, honest things, was the kind of words that come from a man who has spent 8 decades at a piano and in prayer and in the company of people he loves deeply. But what came out of a recent conversation, one that was not meant to become news, not intended to travel across the Southern gospel world the way it did, that was different from anything he had said before. Because the man who built the most beloved musical family in Christian music history looked back across 50 years of singers and homecoming stages and named one person, one voice, one departure he wished, with unmistakable weight in his words, had gone differently. When you hear who it is, and why Bill said what he said, and what it reveals about the man behind all those songs, you will understand why people who were in that conversation have not been able to stop thinking about it since. Stay with this story through to the 10-minute mark, because what Bill says about this singer, specifically what he called this person's gift, and why he believes the gospel community never quite heard everything that voice had to give, that is the part that changes how you understand the entire Gaither Vocal Band legacy. Before we get to the heart of this, it helps to understand who Bill Gaither actually is, because the weight of his admission depends entirely on knowing what he built and what it cost him to build it. Bill Gaither is not simply a songwriter, though few Christian songwriters have ever come close to what he accomplished. Songs like "He Touched Me," "Because He Lives," and "The King Is Coming" did not just reach Christian radio charts, they became the vocabulary of an entire generation's faith. People in hospital rooms reached for those lyrics when they could not find their own. Families standing graveside sang them when nothing else fit. Someone sitting alone in a dark season needed to know that Sunday was coming, and Bill Gaither's words gave them that. What he created, alongside Gloria Gaither, went well beyond songwriting. In 1991, the two of them gathered a group of friends inside a gymnasium in Alexandria, Indiana, and filmed what became the first Gaither homecoming video. By what started as a single nostalgic reunion, grew into something that nobody anticipated, eventually numbering in the hundreds of videos, watched by tens of millions of people, and standing today as one of the most enduring ministries in the history of gospel music. Bill sat at the center of all of it, year after year, steady, faithful, present. The men who sang with the Gaither Vocal Band across those decades each carried something that could not be replicated. Gary McSpadden brought depth and a quiet gravitas that anchored every room he sang in. Mark Lowry brought laughter and an unexpected tenderness that caught audiences off guard in the best possible way. Guy Penrod brought a rugged, reverent quality to every lyric he touched, the kind of voice you felt in your chest before your mind had fully processed what he was singing. David Phelps arrived with what many people still consider the most technically extraordinary tenor voice in gospel music. Wes Hampton brought a sincerity so natural it made even a familiar song feel like something being offered personally. And then there was Michael English, for millions of people who watched those early homecoming videos, the ones from 1991 and 92 when everything still felt electric and new, when something genuinely holy seemed to be getting captured on film. Michael English was the voice that stopped them where they sat, not because of technical precision, not because of range alone, but because of something harder to name. When Michael sang, people who had not cried in years found themselves in tears, not from sadness, but from recognition, from the sensation of hearing something completely true spoken directly into a part of them that needed to hear it. Bill Gaither recognized that gift immediately. He said so more than once in those early years. And yet, by 1994, Michael English was gone from the Gaither Vocal Band, gone from Christian music. They'd gone from the stages that had made him one of the most celebrated voices in the gospel world. The way he left, what followed, and what Bill has carried about that departure for 30 years, that is the story we are telling today. Michael English grew up in North Carolina, the son of a minister, surrounded by Southern gospel music before he was old enough to understand what music could do to people. Singing was simply what he did, what he was built for. Just the way other children took to sports, or drawing, or building things with their hands. Coming up through the Singing Americans, one of the great traditional Southern gospel quartets of the 1980s, Michael had already drawn serious attention from people in the industry by the time Bill Gaither first heard him properly. But noticing a gift and truly understanding what you are looking at are two entirely different things, and what Bill understood went far deeper than what most people were seeing. Well, Michael joined the Gaither Vocal Band formally in 1985, and what Bill gave him in those years was room. Not just a slot in a quartet arrangement, not just a part on a page, but genuine creative space to be exactly who he was as a singer, a full expressionist, a man who could take a lyric the audience had heard 100 times and make it feel, in that specific moment, as though it had never been sung before. Say, that first Homecoming video changed everything for Michael English in ways that were close to overwhelming. The camera found him in that Alexandria gymnasium and simply refused to look elsewhere, and the audience watching at home understood immediately and instinctively why. There was something in his face, in the way he leaned into a phrase, in the way he closed his eyes when the music moved somewhere tender. You were not watching a performance. You were watching a man living entirely inside a song. By 1993, Michael English had won 6 Dove Awards in a single year. 6 in 1 year, which by any measure in Christian music history borders on the unimaginable. A solo career was ascending rapidly alongside his work with the Gaither Vocal Band, and crossover producers in Nashville had begun paying serious attention to what this voice could do in a broader market. His place at the center of the Gaither family looked, from the outside, just like the most secure position a gospel artist could hold. And that's when everything came apart. In 1994, Michael English stepped away from Christian music following a personal moral failure, a situation that was painful, public, and that shook the gospel community in ways that lasted for years. He returned the Dove Awards. He stepped off every stage. The Homecoming family, the millions of fans who had come to love him, Mushy's the voice that had stopped people cold in living rooms across America, all of it went silent. What most people know is that Michael fell. What far fewer people have focused on is how Bill Gaither responded to that fall and what Bill has chosen, 30 years later, to say about his own role in what happened. Stay with us, because the answer to that is what this entire story has been building toward, and it is worth hearing in full. And this is where the story takes a turn that nobody in Bill's circle quite anticipated. In the years immediately following Michael English's departure from the Gaither Vocal Band, Bill did something that surprised people who were watching closely. He did not distance himself from Michael's legacy. He did not reshape the Homecoming story in a way that erased what Michael had contributed. Those early videos featuring Michael's voice continued to circulate, continued to minister to people, and Bill never pulled them. That choice said something that no press statement could have said more clearly. When Michael's name came up in interviews across those years, Bill consistently spoke about him with what could only be called a father's grief. Not the grief of someone disappointed in an employee who failed to meet expectations, but the grief of someone who loved a person and watched them go through something devastating without knowing how to reach them across the distance that had opened up. Michael English, for his part, did eventually find his way back. He returned to Christian music, to recording, to performing. Over the years, he has spoken publicly and with a transparency that is itself a form of ministry about his failures, his recovery, and the grace he received from people he had no right to expect it from. Conversation was reflective in tone. The conversation was reflective in tone, the kind of exchange a man allows himself when he is looking back over a long life and trying to be honest about what he finds there. Bill was asked directly whether any singer in the full history of the Gaither Vocal Band had left before the gospel world was finished hearing everything that voice had to give. And Bill said Michael English's name without a pause. He said it the way a person says the name of someone they have thought about a great deal and for a long time. What followed was specific. Today, Bill described Michael's gift using a phrase he had clearly chosen carefully. He called it inhabited singing. The ability to be so completely present inside a lyric that the listener was not processing melody and words in the normal way. Something bypassed the analytical mind entirely and reached the place in a person where faith actually lives. That, Bill said, was what Michael English carried, and he had never encountered it in quite the same form in any other singer, before or since. And then Bill said the part that stopped people cold. He said he regrets not doing more, not working harder in those critical months of 1994 to create a path that would let Michael step back rather than step away entirely. The way the situation unfolded, Bill admitted, the gospel community, and here he included himself directly, without deflection, was not as equipped to hold space for someone in that kind of crisis as the songs they sang every night demanded they should be, as they would need to be if the grace they preached was real. He did not say this to distribute blame. He did not say it to rewrite what happened or to suggest that Michael's choices belonged to anyone else. What Bill Gaither said was simply this: an older man looking back and finding the gap between what he believed and how he acted when belief was actually tested. He said that the voice that stopped everyone cold in that Alexandria gymnasium deserved a community around it that was as gracious as the music it sang. That is a weight Bill has carried for 30 years, and he said it plainly. What Bill Gaither's words open up is not only a story about one singer and one departure from the Gaither Vocal Band. The larger question his admission raises is what the gospel community does, what it has always done, when one of its own stumbles publicly and badly. And the honest answer to that question is more complicated than most people inside that community are comfortable acknowledging. The homecoming videos were built on a specific idea, and it was not just musical. The idea was that these artists were not performing Christianity from a stage, they were living it. Grace was supposed to be the operating principle of that living. Not grace as a lyric, not grace as a concept to be explained from a platform, but grace as a daily choice made toward real people in situations that are messy and costly and do not resolve neatly before the cameras stop rolling. Bill's admission that he wishes he had leaned further into grace in 1994 is not, in his own framing, an indictment of anyone. What it is something more honest than an indictment. It is the testimony of a man who has spent 82 years learning that grace is harder to practice than it is to preach, and that one of the ongoing costs of that gap is that gifted people sometimes fall through it before anyone reaches them. Michael English, by all available evidence, is in a good place today. He is still singing. That quality Bill named, inhabited singing, that fullness of presence that makes a listener feel not just moved, but genuinely seen, it is still there when he performs. He has spoken about the difficult years with a candor that is itself a form of ministry. And he has spoken about Bill Gaither with a love and gratitude that could not be manufactured. But Bill's regret is real, and for those who have followed both men across the full arc of their stories in Southern gospel and Christian music, it carries meaning that goes well beyond biography. The difference between welcoming the prodigal back after he has made his own way home and going out to look for him before he has to make that walk alone, that is what Bill was pointing toward. And whether you hear that as a reflection on 1994 specifically, or on what any community of faith owes its members in a crisis, it carries the same weight, either way. For those of us who have followed the homecoming world across the years, the Gaither Vocal Band albums, the recordings that came out of those Alexandria sessions, the way this community of artists became the soundtrack of so many people's faith lives, this kind of honesty from Bill feels like something worth sitting with. Not something to analyze quickly or use as the foundation of a verdict about anyone's choices. Something to receive as what it actually is. The testimony of a man who has loved the gospel and the people who sing it for a very long time, and who is still, at 82, paying attention to what that love requires of him. Bill built something that has ministered to more people in more moments of genuine need than most of us can measure. He has sat at a piano in gymnasiums and arenas and on outdoor stages and brought people back to themselves through song. Decade after decade, he gathered voices that carried something true, not just talent, but actual truth, and pointed those voices toward the people who needed to hear them most. David Phelps, Guy Penrod, Wes Hampton, Mark Lowry, Russ Taff, Michael English, each one irreplaceable in a different way. And now, from the vantage point of a long and full life, Bill is saying that even inside all of that faithfulness, there are things he would do differently. One voice, above all others, is the one he wishes had been given more room to stay, more support in a dark season, more of the grace that his own songs promised was available. For those of you who have been fans of Michael English since those early homecoming days, since you first saw that young man from North Carolina close his eyes in that gymnasium and sing as though nothing else in the world existed, you know exactly what Bill means. You felt it the first time you heard him. Nobody else has quite replicated it since. And the man who recognized that gift first and gave it the largest possible stage is telling you that he knows what you felt, and that he has never stopped caring about what happened to that voice and the man who carried it. There is one more part of this story that most people have not fully connected yet, and it involves not just Michael English, but a broader pattern in how the Gaither Vocal Band has always navigated the space between grace and expectation. Michael English is not the only man whose story brushes against this question. Russ Taff, one of the most powerful and beloved voices in the wider Gaither family, a singer whose performances on the Homecoming recordings have moved generations of listeners, has spoken publicly about his own years of struggle with alcohol. A battle he fought largely out of sight of his audience, a secret that cost him enormously in terms of isolation and fear of what the gospel community's response would be if the truth came out. Russ has described the relief and the grace he eventually found when he stopped hiding, both from himself and from the people around him. Bill Gaither's relationship with Russ across those years and in the years since reflects the same quality that runs through his words about Michael English. A refusal to write people out of the story when the story gets hard. A belief, grounded apparently not just in theology but in genuine personal conviction, and that the people who sing about grace are obligated to practice it in the places where practicing it costs something real. These are not easy positions to hold inside a public ministry. The gospel community, like any community, carries its expectations, its standards, its understandable desire to see the people who represent its faith live up to what that faith declares. The tension between grace and accountability is one that every church and every family of faith works out in real time, that without the benefit of a clean answer that holds across every situation. What Bill Gaither's reflection gives us is not a policy or a prescription. What it gives us is an honest man looking back and saying, in that situation, with that particular gift, I wish I had stayed longer in the difficulty. I wish I had created more room for grace to actually work. Hearing that from a man who has given his entire life to the gospel is something worth receiving carefully. It is not defensive, and it is not self-congratulatory. It does not tie itself into a neat resolution. It is simply honest, and in a world that too often mistakes certainty for faithfulness, that kind of honesty is itself a form of ministry worth paying attention to. Michael English is still singing. His voice still carries what it has always carried, that quality of full presence, that gift for inhabited singing that Bill named and that audiences responded to with something deeper than applause. And Bill Gaither, who's at 82, is still at the piano, still pointing people towards songs that matter, still building something that will outlast him. What comes next for both of them, and for the broader Gaither Vocal Band family, as it continues to minister in a world that keeps changing around it, is something the gospel community will be watching. Because the story Bill is telling through his honesty is not finished, not even close to finished. Them people watching right now who sat in living rooms in 1991 and felt something shift in them when Michael English sang in that first Homecoming video, leave a word in the comments. Not about the controversy, not about the fall, but about what you heard. What that voice meant to you in a season when you needed exactly what it was carrying. Because Bill Gaither has been listening to those voices for 8 decades, and if his recent honesty tells us anything, or it is that he believes the people who felt something real when Michael English sang are owed the full story, told with the same grace that runs through every song he has ever written. Whatever comes next, those who have followed this ministry for decades know one thing without question. Bill Gaither's story, and the story of every voice he gathered around him, is nowhere near its end. If this story stayed with you, the next video in this series will as well. We have been looking closely at another chapter of the Gaither Vocal Band's history, a season that Bill himself has rarely spoken about directly, and what came out of that period is just as unexpected and just as worth your time as everything you heard today.